Welcome back, everyone. Welcome
Hello.
back to Critical Conversations, episode 4.
Yes.
Had a nice little week off for Labor Day weekend. Got to see some family. It was very nice. But we're back and ready to talk about some more ideas, dig into some arguments, and try to figure some stuff out. So.
Yeah, we got a couple pieces of news for you guys, and we're going to talk today about stereotypes and kind of just have a conversation about what stereotypes are good, what stereotypes are bad, how to not overgeneralize, when it's useful, when it's not, and just kind of have a conversation about it. So I think it'll be really good.
It's going to be awesome. I've definitely never thought about this at all. So this is, I think, something, oh my gosh, that is a really loud car.
It's a nice motorcycle.
Holy moly. Someone the other day that was just like so loud back and forth, like 4 or 5 times.
So what happens when you get that nice mic, you know? It just picks everything up.
It'll pick it up.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness. Anyway, this is definitely something Jared's been thinking a lot about, and I have learned a lot about this week. So I'm excited to hear more about that. But in the meantime, have some news for you. So I'll start off with the first piece. So I'm not going to throw up anything on the screen for this one, but you've probably heard a lot of hullabaloo about the CDC allegedly releasing, well, they did release a statement talking about, how do you say this word?
Comorbidities, I think.
Comorbidities.
Comorbidities.
Hard to say. Comorbidities, which basically means that they released information for those people who were sick with COVID and died. Was it, what underlying conditions did they have? Did they, how many people had X underlying condition, how many had Y? Because there have definitely been a lot of rumors and talk about, well, COVID's really only affecting those with underlying conditions. If you have no underlying conditions, you're otherwise healthy, it's not going to kill you, whatever. And they did release a statement. I guess I'll go ahead and share the actual wording just so we can see it. So right here, this is what came out. I can't remember when this came out. This was they've been updating it, but probably came out 2 or 3 weeks ago, depending on when you're watching this. But the statement that kind of made everyone perk up a little bit was this: for 6% of the deaths, COVID-19 was the only cause mentioned for deaths with conditions or causes in addition to COVID. On average, there were 2.6 additional conditions or causes per death. So this created a lot of spin, a lot of narrative. You had a lot of more right-wing commentators and pundits saying, oh, basically this is a revision of the total death count, that the CDC is backtracking their number and saying, okay, well, COVID really only killed 6% of these people. Because I think a lot of people were suspecting that, oh, well, just because someone died and they were positive for COVID, they're counting it as a COVID death. But all along, it was just cancer or stroke, and they happened to have COVID.
Right. I know I got texts from friends that were just like, oh my gosh, did you see COVID? Like, it's just all this, big hullabaloo. And it's like, okay, well, let's dig into what this number actually means, or what this actually means.
Right. Yeah. And there was a lot of pushback, I think, on the left saying that's not what this means at all. Just because you have an underlying condition, COVID is still what pushed you over the edge. And if you were struggling with diabetes and then you caught COVID and you died because you had diabetes, that's still attributable to COVID.
Right. Because you wouldn't have otherwise died if you just had diabetes.
Right. So we kind of wanted to sit down and talk about what this meant. I think it's definitely important to realize that the CDC is not saying 6% is the only COVID-related death. It's just saying, there was more than one factor at play, but COVID is the thing that put the person over the edge and died. So I think it's important to realize on both sides, the right, it's not just 6%. There's a legitimate, you might have been sick, but you weren't dying, and now COVID what pushed you over the edge. But on the left, it's important to realize that if you are healthy and you don't have underlying conditions, like especially like we've seen if you're younger, this is pretty significant finding that COVID is a lot less likely to kill you if you don't have those underlying conditions, which is really important.
Right. Because I think we were talking about colleges across campuses are returning, and like we're seeing these huge spikes across campuses. And
right.
I'm thinking in Baylor and University of Alabama, like a lot of these schools are having these big spikes, and I think it showed like, but none of these kids are going to the hospital. They're not getting the same sick that people in New York and people in
right.
Texas were getting when it was really bad. And so I think that just shows that like if you're young and you're healthy,
exactly,
you're not gonna this is not a fatal disease. But
right.
that means for all these college kids that are potentially exposed or are getting it, have to be very cautious when they go outside of people that are in a college age. If they go, back to their grandparents, back to their parents, we have to be very careful because it could be very dangerous for other people.
Right. Professors, things like that, who they are interacting with.
Right.
Cafeteria workers, stuff like that.
For sure.
Really important. Another cool thing to think about now that okay, well, 6% was solely COVID. Well, does that mean that all of these people who had a respiratory failure, some other circulatory disease, something like that, were they basically going to die anyway? Do we see this normal trend of deaths happening regardless of COVID? Like how much
just quickly kill off the people that were already planning to die in the next year.
Planning to die.
Well, yeah.
I know what you mean.
Right.
Yeah, exactly right though. So an important number to look at, and I've seen, I'll go ahead and share my screen. I'll start with the CDC's page, is thinking about the excess death mortality rate.
Right.
So excess deaths, man, there are a lot of, maybe I'm just bad at speaking, but basically this excess death idea says, well, let's consider where the death count normally would be without COVID, like on average, and we'll figure out how many
car wrecks, heart attacks, cancer,
car wrecks, heart attacks, all of these, including all these underlying conditions,
right?
Like they say here, respiratory diseases, circulatory diseases, all of this. Let's figure out how much has COVID actually pushed up that amount compared to what we would expect to see on average. So this is like the CDC's little chart. I'll show a thing that's a little bit more visually helpful, but you can kind of tell like, all right, so this is, oh my goodness, it's refreshing. Okay. Good to know we're getting the most up-to-date statistics here.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But yeah, you can see this is kind of back in 2017. We've got a very normal trend. There's a little bump here in like early 2018. That might be a flu season. I'm not actually sure.
Yeah, was that swine flu or no?
Definitely, I don't think swine flu. Yeah, that was. Yeah, but maybe this was a particularly bad flu season, something like that.
Yeah.
And then over here you have quite a significant jump, and that's your COVID-19 jump, and
much higher than the trend line.
Yeah, they'll tell you how much further above the estimated deaths or the expected deaths you are with what the estimated death is, and you can see sort of better picture.
Right.
I'll switch over to
see an initial bump, and then a slope down, and then a little extra bump for that little second wave we had, and then and then back down.
Yeah. So right here, this is the ourworldindata.org, which I probably should have double checked this is legit, but yeah, I think everyone's been using this. I know they do a good job pulling reputable data, but it says the U.S. has seen more than 244,000 excess deaths between March 1st and August 16th, compared to the 169,000 confirmed COVID deaths during that period. So if you're looking at it here, you can kind of see right around mid-March, we see the COVID start to take off and the excess deaths rising significantly.
Right.
So this is obviously a really broad stroke, and I don't think it's going to completely show exactly what's COVID. There could be deaths related to like having hospitals harder to get into. Maybe there's more deaths because people did not want to go to the hospital for stuff they probably should have gone to. Like we've seen rise in suicide, things like that. So it's not going to perfectly.
Businesses and nonprofits are hit harder that give aid to
exactly
groups that are hit hard, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Right. So it's not going to perfectly capture, but I think it is an important thing to notice. Like, well, even though the CDC is saying only 6% of COVID deaths were solely COVID, it's still important to notice that we do have a really big gap in excess deaths. So these people that are dying from their comorbidities and COVID, on average, probably should not be dying at this rate. Therefore, like it's still a significant thing to take in mind. Anyway, this is like all in the weeds. These are good tools to look into yourselves with this excess mortality and looking more into COVID's 6% and what kind of the common comorbidities are. But it's important to realize like kind of two things. Like, yes, 6% is solely COVID, and that probably does mean if you're healthy and you're young, it's definitely not as risky as you might have once thought. On the other hand, I think it's important to realize we still do have a lot of death that is just unprecedented from COVID, unprecedented in recent times.
Yeah, and I think this is just a good example of like when you hear these headlines that are that are like radically different than what you thought, or are just kind of like pique your interest or whatever, it's worth going in. Okay, so what did the CDC actually say? What was the original claim? And then what is the supporting of this claim? And I think when you get into the weeds, the original headlines were proven false, but it's still an interesting thing to bring up in this conversation. So,
absolutely. Yep. Awesome. So that's the end of the COVID section of news.
Yeah. So I kind of have a little bit more personal news. So this isn't something that's affecting, the country or the world, or this is kind of particular to me. And I just, as this is an opportunity for me to share, and I wanted to share. So I mentioned in the first episode, I went to John Brown University, which is a small liberal arts Christian college in Arkansas. So it's, traditionally conservative and holds to Christian values, and is pretty, typical of what you'd think of a small Christian college. And just to like say, like the last couple of years, we've had some recurring issues that a lot of colleges have faced, of whether it's free speech or having conservatives come to campus, and these ideas of what's okay for college students to hear. We had Mike Huckabee come when I was a sophomore, and there were protests, about 100 people or so wearing shirts and protesting against some of the things he'd said, which rightfully weren't some of what a Christian should say. And those were done very respectfully and so forth. Anyway, so this last week, Eric Metaxas, which if you don't know him, he's a author and conservative. Like, he has a radio show. I've read some of his books. He wrote a really good book on Bonhoeffer, a book on Seven Men, and that's his like big one. Amazing Grace was made into a movie. That was pretty popular. He wrote the original book that movie was based off of. So it's been a fairly influential figure, especially when it comes to like history and and that kind of stuff. And so in the last couple of years, he's done what a lot of recent conservative Christians have, and have kind of jumped on the Trump train, for better or for worse. Mm-hmm. And so some of his messaging and his Twitter and all of his kind of rhetoric has gotten very Trumpian. And so basically students decided they were going to protest the arrival of Eric Metaxas coming to JVU. And so I went on his Twitter and I was like, okay, I don't just agree with some of the things he's saying. And, but I was just curious, so what these students were protesting. And they're talking about the typical, like, he is anti-LGBTQ, he is, homophobic and against Black and Indigenous people of color, et cetera, et cetera.
So these are all sort of things that they would say probably for Trump or Huckabee, like same general.
the same general kind of generalizations that you would say about most conservative speakers that would happen to come on campus. So specifically, Metaxas was coming to JBU to speak on whether or not it was, should Christians vote for Trump? And they had a more liberal, Jonathan French, or Justin French, I think, one of the two, coming to speak on one side, and then Metaxas to speak on the other. So I think that's a cool, like, he wasn't coming to speak for Chapel, he wasn't coming to speak for one of that, it was just this forum that they were talking about whether this is good or bad. Anyway, so I just clicked on I saw several Instagram posts from my friends, both alumni and students there, that were reposting this post, and it had a action letter that was in, that was saying you should sign this letter if you don't agree that Metaxas should come speak, and then send it to the people in charge. So I wanted to read real quick about one of these, part of the letter that I found particularly just kind of crazy. So Metaxas, vocal Trump supporter, more critically anti-Black, misogynist, kind of the typical stuff that you'd hear. But then this paragraph comes that says, this choice, regardless of intention, does not anticipate the repercussions involved in entertaining hate speech or cruel ideologies. JBU students will be hurt emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually by the presence and entertainment of Mr. Metaxas. Students will need medical attention for the certain mental damage this level of aggression inflicts. And it goes on from there a while. But
my goodness.
I got had like an emotional and physical reaction to reading that, which is, I guess, is how they felt, when they hear Metaxas is coming. And I felt like I wanted to mention this, and like this probably represents a small minority of students. We looked up a little bit of the protests that happened and looked like too many people. And I don't know what the general population of JBU is, or what the general climate was there anymore. But I just wanted to share this because I think it is such a insidious way of thinking about how we relate to each other as human beings. And I think there is evil in the world, and we have to stand against evil. So even if you think Metaxas is evil, I think the way you approach someone coming to share their opinions is not that, and immediately saying this is going to physically hurt people by the mere presence of somebody, regardless of intention, right?
Right. Well, so did they, like, in fairness to them, I feel like we could at least ask this, like, did they mention any past statements that Eric Metaxas had said where he was, like, blatantly over the line, or actually called for any of these things that they're claiming, like harming people or some, like, hate speech or something? Like, did they give any examples?
No, not that I saw, not that it was on their Instagram page or on that form letter. And I think, which there might have been, like I said, from the top, like I went on his Twitter and he says things that are very Trumpian and very,
right,
that kind of language. And so I understand, like, I can understand you thinking that this person is not something you want JV to represent, and you don't want to represent, so you're going to have an issue with him coming. But I think the idea that you have to ban somebody for coming, because the letter was basically requesting him not to come.
Right.
Ban him from coming because of the impact it's going to make on students. I think as Christians and as human beings, we can control our emotional and physical reactions to a mere presence of somebody. And I think that when we want to have conversations and learn how to, like, have these kind of conversations where we're learning, like, should we vote for Trump or not? Because there are Christians that say, yes and no, sincerely on both sides, and so I think it's ridiculous to be able to just shut someone's opinion down because of how it's going to hurt students.
Yeah, right. Especially in the context of a voluntary college forum atmosphere where you're choosing to go. Like, we know that colleges are supposed to be a place where you can have free thought and discuss ideas. And yeah, like you said, this idea that any opposing opinions on it just needs to be shut down, and anything that could be labeled harmful can't happen. And
which, this isn't a new idea. Like, colleges have been dealing with this for the last decade, right? It's just not something, but it just particularly hit home for me because both I've read and I know Eric Metaxas, and it was, my alma mater. I've seen friends that have posted this statement, and it just like this is my platform to speak out. So I wanted to share.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. It is crazy. I mean, I'm trying to think, like, I think there are definitely people that I would be angry that my college would give a platform to, but I feel like
Right.
those individuals are probably very far and in between. And I would want to see like concrete examples of like that this person is like dangerous and hateful, and there's no merit to be had. Like there are no good faith arguments, but like that is like a line that I would want to cross as a last resort. Like,
Right.
I don't even want to hear this person speak, you know,
Right. Because if the
or give
average
other people the opportunity to hear him speak.
Right. Because if the average person that I disagree with came to JBU, it's like, okay, I don't agree with you, but I want to listen to your opinions. I want to,
Right.
it's okay for you to share your thoughts.
Yeah.
And I get, these people that are coming to this are doing it out of, they see an issue with the black people on campus and LGBTQ students on campus, which that's been a whole issue at JBU for a long time. Like it's not coming from this horrible, hateful place, I don't think, but
Yeah.
I think it's not a good argument to have, and it doesn't actually help anything. And the letter goes on to say this will make right-wing students more aggressive and will enable them to harass students of color, which I think is ridiculous and is turning students against each other when at a small Christian college where we all have this one idea that's unifying is our motto of the school is Christ over all, right? Like that should be where we all come to the table and talk together,
Right.
instead of just dividing based on politics.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah, really interesting.
Yep.
Thank you for sharing. It's definitely one of those scenarios where I think in an effort to not allow divisiveness, you've actually like created divisiveness, and you're like accusing people of, oh, you're going to divide us. And it's like, well, that's like a division right there.
Yep.
So wild.
Yeah,
all right. I think that's
crazy.
it for the news.
Okay. Yep. That's all I got for that. So, okay. So today we're going to be talking about stereotypes. So this was kind of my lead into this is at JBU, my freshman year. We were probably 3 months into school, and we were just all sitting in my common area. There was probably maybe 8 to 10 of us, give or take the hour we were discussing. And we had started talking about homeschooling, and because I was, Sam and I were both homeschooled, but I was specifically talking about me and my experiences. And, I made like a joke about homeschoolers or something like that. And one of the guys had asked, is that okay to make a joke or make a stereotype or a generalization about homeschoolers? I was like, yeah, I mean, it's fine. It's like, I did that all the time in high school when I was in the in group, and it led us to having this conversation that lasted like 3 hours. Wait, so what were you gonna ask?
You broke up a little.
Oh, sorry.
I think you said, let's see. Yeah, I got most of it. You said, okay. When he said, is that okay? You said, yeah, it's okay. Like, you cut off a little bit.
Yeah. So like basically I said it was okay because I was in the in group. I was a homeschooler. I was part of it, I was part of it. And then it led to this general conversation of, is it okay to use stereotypes to generalize, or are stereotypes okay? And a lot of the people living in the suite were saying, no, it's not. Like stereotypes are never okay. Like it's never a good idea to mention stereotypes. And I was coming from the opinion like, oh no, I think stereotypes are fine, and they can like really helpful, and then it's fun to joke about them, especially if you're like part of that stereotype. Anyway, and it just led to this really good conversation, which got heated at times, but it was really a formational conversation, both as a suite and bringing us together and having these conversations, but also for me personally in my walk to understand how other people think and to be exposed to other ideas and to learn how to have a conversation without getting mad or angry or whatever. And so I often return to that conversation as like a milestone in my development of how I share my opinion. But it's often, so this topic has often percolated in the back of my head, like, oh, are stereotypes good? Like, you know, in recent years, you often hear of stereotypes being are a very negative idea, but we still use stereotypes all the time, whether it's in comedy shows, whether it's in, you know, our daily lives, or, you know, it's really, really easy. So I just kind of wanted to dive in and have a conversation about, okay, what does that actually look like
Yeah.
practically? What are some of the questions that we have when talking about stereotypes? When is it good? When is it bad? What, just all of those kinds of questions. This is the
Right.
perfect platform to do that. So, yeah, you have
Yeah.
any?
Yeah. When you first when you first pitched this, I was like, oh, I've definitely never thought of this at all before. Like, usually when I hear the word stereotype, like the first thing that jumps to my head is like racial stereotypes. And
Right.
like, obviously I would say like, oh, that is like definitely tending to be a bad thing. Like, even if you have racial stereotypes, you should do your best to fight against them and like not assume. And I think, you know, we'll probably get into all of that. And I think there's definitely wisdom to that. But there are a lot of stereotypes that are not racial where I was like, oh, yeah, I guess like I definitely have seen in my own language, like, oh, you know, that kid, he's like a stereotypical fraternity guy, or like stereotypical band kid. Like, there are a lot of ways we use that. And then, like you said, in humor or comedy or like skits, like there's endless stereotypes. And
Right. I think
yeah,
it
I
often,
kind of started to think about, go ahead.
I think it just begs the question of like, okay, when is this okay or not? Like, when
Right.
is it okay to stereotype and when isn't it, and why?
Right. Because obviously there are plenty of bad ways that jump to mind, but I started thinking about there are definitely ways that stereotypes can be helpful, I think.
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say is that when doing research and trying to look up, like, you know, what stereotypes good or bad, I'd say 95% of essays and articles and conversations about stereotypes have to do with race and sex. Those are the two main things people talk about when thinking of stereotypes. And I think that is what pops into your mind when you say the word
Sure.
stereotypes, right? Like, you think, oh, you know, Black people are good at sports, or, you know, Asians are smart, like even positive stereotypes. And the
Right.
general consensus from academia is that these stereotypes often add a negative pressure to those people. They don't actually mean what they should mean. Like, they maybe have the broad
Mm-hmm.
sense of truth, but in reality, it's much more minutiae than that. We shouldn't tear people down or even build people up just based on these little things.
Right.
Or, you know, gender stereotypes, you know, man must provide for the household, woman has to stay at home, all those kinds of things.
Right.
And they can see how that is, and you can see how that is a negative, that can be taken very negatively.
Right.
So yeah, that's kind of that's like what most people talk about, but so many of my questions aren't about those kinds of stereotypes. It's all the minutia underneath that, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
So first I want to read some just kind of some statements and some like definitions, and kind of to make sure we're all on the same page. So stereotypes from the University of
Absolutely.
Colorado says they are based on preconceptions that are derived from existing sources of information about certain people and selective perceptions developed to explain their behavior. So from that, I read that and I'm like, okay, well, that's not necessarily a negative thing, right? That is saying we just make the preconceptions based on how to explain their behavior, right? It's just a way of
Right.
helping us. It's a shortcut in your brain to help it make sense of their behavior.
Right. Probably like unconsciously a lot of times, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Which I think we have to fight against depending on the stereotype, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
You should be aware of it, like, at least if you're not like trying to actively ignore it, you should at least be aware of what's happening.
yeah. So, and then later in the article, it makes this claim: indeed, their primary purpose is to degrade others as a mean of accentuating our own humanity. And I don't know what I think of that statement. I think do all stereotypes, when we use stereotypes, are they cut downs in order to build our own
Yeah.
selves up? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. He says their primary purpose.
Right. Not their only
Um,
purpose, but
right.
yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, like you said, it's so hard. I think it's even hard to comprehend all of the ways we use stereotypes, and they're probably happening without even thinking about it. Like, oh, this is a politician. Like, I'm framing everything I hear through the lens of this is a politician, a Democrat,
Right.
a Republican.
Right.
Like, that's a stereotype for sure. But there's a difference between there's so much to dig into. Like, for example, race is not like a choice that you make. Like, this
Right.
person didn't choose to be this race, so obviously your stereotypes there are going to be completely different. Whereas if you say, okay, well, this person chose to be in this activity or chooses to be in this camp of thought, so maybe it's different to read into it there. You know what I'm saying? But
Yep.
obviously you can never be like 100% sure. So yeah, I mean, I definitely was thinking about some of the like positive stereotypes out there that are helpful.
Yeah.
Even though, you know, you have to be careful with how you use them. Do you want to jump into some of those, like, the types of examples we mean?
Yeah, we can. I
Or
think
if you want to go somewhere first.
no, I just think the other statement that kind of frames this is that same article says they have little to or no ascertainable basis in fact, which I think depends on the stereotype, but a lot of stereotypes are rooted in the fact that they are that way, right? I immediately think of at JBU, the stereotype of a athlete was that they didn't know anyone outside of their athletic team, right? So that they only hung out with their athletic team and they never socialized with anyone else. Obviously, that's not completely true. Like, that's a generalization, and there are plenty of athletes that were completely integrated on campus. But also, there's a reason that we said that is because they always sat at the exact same tables in the CAF. They took classes and they sat in classes together. They would, all do the same work, study, jobs together. Like, there's a sense of truth in that idea.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean it's a good thing. It doesn't mean we should perpetuate that so that athletes feel like they're outsiders on campus. Like, we had that discussion too. But that isn't a completely objectively false statement. It's not a false claim.
Right. But I wonder, like, if that's true, like, how is there any way that that's helpful information? Like, can it ever be helpful, or does it only hurt to know that? Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. I think it often can hurt depending on, who you're talking to, right? If you're talking to an athlete that feels isolated because they don't fit in on their team and they feel like they can't break out, then it might be that way. But it's not. I'm just saying that's something we use all the time.
Yeah.
And it's not often seen as a negative, even though it may very well be.
Right.
So, but yeah, do you want to talk about some of like stereotypes that could be good?
Yeah, some positive examples. Yeah, well, something that I think is a really good example of a helpful positive stereotype. So something that I was definitely told when I was a little kid, and I know a lot of people have this similar thing, is like, when you're little and you get lost, if you get lost in the store and you need to ask someone for help, my mom would tell me, like, don't go ask a single man, try to find a woman, preferably with kids, and ask her for help. Yep. Which is definitely something that a lot of people have been told. I don't know, were you ever told that?
I was told store employee, and then if I couldn't find an employee, then go to like another mom or a woman. Yeah. Or I just intuitively would look for a woman,
Right.
Yeah.
Which, first of all, like, it's definitely a stereotype.
Right.
And a kind of sad stereotype, knowing that, like, oh, if my kid's lost, it's safer for them to go speak to a woman. But that definitely seems like a fair and helpful stereotype to me, like, because we know well, I guess we don't know, but I feel like you would look and say like, okay, well, what's the population that's, kidnapping children or
No, I mean,
abuse patterns, things like that.
I've seen statistics like that. Like it's like 90% male.
Right.
It doesn't not exclusively male, obviously, but like that is the majority of predators in the country are male.
So obviously, going to a woman if you're lost is, as a little kid, is not infallible. Like it's not gonna be true every time, but that's definitely good advice, I think, to give a little kid, even though it's a stereotype, right? Like the odds of a mom with kids being person, not 0%, but probably a lot lower.
Right.
And so that was something I thought, like, that's definitely a stereotype. That definitely seems helpful to me. And I don't think I would ever not tell my kid that for fear of like teaching him that an unfair, like giving him a stereotypical view of men or women. Like that just seems like that's how it is. And it's helpful truth to know.
Right.
Like.
Yeah, no, I think that kind of gets the broader idea of like, I read an article from some scientist that was talking about like we use stereotypes to help us navigate these tiny little daily decisions, whether they're good or bad, and it's often in like the back of our head, like just we use them to navigate the world just like we use any other shortcut in our lives, and not all of them are negative. I think a lot of like age stereotypes can be helpful. Like you have a stereotype of how a 5-year-old acts, right? And so when you meet a 5-year-old, not to run screaming at them, or like you wouldn't treat a 5-year-old the same way you treat a 15-year-old, right? You're not going to talk to them the same way,
right? Or if I'm striking up conversation with a 20-year-old, I might ask them like, what kind of video games do you play? Watch sports. If I'm speaking to an 80-year-old woman, I'm not going to have the same questions,
right? Yeah, I think there's just a broad different ways we use the world, or we help navigate the world. But
like obviously there are terrible and unhelpful ways that we can use stereotypes.
Oh, for sure. And I think we should be aware of that. I think a lot of my research and kind of, I don't know if this is a conclusion, but I realize, a lot of stereotypes are unhelpful, and we should actively think about when we use a stereotype, be like, okay, is this a helpful stereotype or is this something that's not helpful? Like, and then should we, like, I think even the JVU sports example could be like, okay, now that we've claimed that as like, that's something people say, like, how can we push back against that or anything really, like, So I think freshman year, I would have been like, yeah, no, stereotypes are fine.
Right. Yeah, but it definitely, if you start taking them as true, then you might like have an opportunity to strike up conversation with maybe an athlete who like has been trouble finding that community in the sport, but you're just assuming they're fine, and you don't take that step when you really should have, and they really might have benefited, like for example.
Yeah, for sure. So I was just curious to what you've thought of, because I started this idea of talking about stereotypes of homeschooling. I was curious to what you think of how we stereotype homeschoolers.
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely growing up homeschooled, like the first person to make jokes about homeschoolers was always us. Like we loved the stereotype and like the jokes, and like there were definitely times where we would joke about the like awkward stereotypes of homeschoolers, like, oh, they're socially awkward and they live under a rock and they don't know anything about pop culture, and like those were fun.
Yeah, we'd also talk about the other stereotypes, like, oh, we can relate better to adults than we do to kids, like those kind of like dumb things.
I definitely remember there being like a lot of like pride. You would have like, oh, we're Christian homeschoolers, and like when these public schoolers are over here making a fool of themselves and like cursing and being dumb, Like that's the public schoolers. Like
Right.
I definitely remember making jokes on both sides of the coin.
Oh,
But I've
no.
always thought it was funny. I mean, I don't know if this happens to you. I'm almost positive it does. Where you tell someone, "Oh, I was actually homeschooled," and then they're like, "What?" And then the first thing they say is, "Oh, I couldn't even tell." And
Yep.
you're just like, "Oh, what?" Like, but I mean, it shocks you the first couple times, but it doesn't anymore because people
No, yeah,
literally
it's
always say that.
always say that. Yeah.
Which it's so funny because like it means that in their head they have a stereotype of homeschoolers that is like awkward and has like trouble relating to people because they didn't grow up with other kids, XYZ. But it's literally every time you talk to someone who has homeschoolers or have any interactions with them, they're like, "Oh, I couldn't even tell," and then they say that like it's a consolation, like
Congratulations.
don't worry, you don't
They
seem
did
homeschooled.
right. You're better than all the rest.
Like
So
I was really sweating, like, oh man, can they tell?
right.
Just really funny.
No, for
Um,
sure.
yeah, but yeah, I definitely that happened a lot as a homeschooler. That's probably the biggest stereotype
Yeah, I
I
think
grew up with.
yeah, that was definitely one. Or like, um, now I'd feel like I get more of like the nerd stereotype, or like, um, you can see my wall of fantasy books. It's like, like those kinds of,
Mm-hmm.
um, oh, you're into politics, so that assumes, a bunch of things about a person or whatever. Um,
Right.
I think that's
Yeah.
more how it comes across now. Or, talking about Christians, like there's often stereotypes that come with
Yeah.
these different labels.
Right.
Um,
Absolutely.
so
Yeah. There's definitely like such a prevalence of stereotypes.
yeah, I think, well, and one of the other, so kind of like shifting a little bit, but like talking about stereotypes in humor, because I think often we don't want to use stereotypes when we make judgments about people, because it's like, okay, well, we don't really know that person. Like, if you just thought I was a nerd or into video games or whatever, which I don't play video games really very much at all, but I'm much more, I'm into politics, and it's like, oh, I
Right.
also watch sports, and like, so there's like, people are much more than one thing. But I think
Of course, yeah.
but when we watch TV and like you listen to comedians, like they're often use stereotypes to make fun of those things, which
Yeah.
I think is a good thing. Because
Yeah.
I often find them very, very funny, especially even on the groups that I'm in with, right?
Yeah. I mean,
But it's a tricky conversation for sure.
well, it definitely feels like the majority of stand-up comedy is based on stereotypes. Like,
Right, because like you listen to Jim Gaffigan,
there's
and he's
like
making stereotypes of
exactly,
dads and food
exactly.
and overweight
Or
people.
he has his
Or
new show, which is like The Pale Tourist or whatever.
okay, I haven't seen it.
It's on Amazon Prime now, and
Okay,
like he did one in Canada, and it's about all these different areas he's traveled to,
okay,
and the whole gig is just like Canadian stereotypes and jokes. That's
right.
like the whole joke,
Yeah,
right?
I wrote that down. I was
So
like, is that a positive stereotype? Like Canadians are nice. Like, is
yeah,
that yeah?
it's right, yeah, it's everywhere. But I think we're starting to see more and more like it becoming less socially acceptable to joke about stereotypes, or there's kind of this like you can joke about stereotypes if you're sort of in that group also, like
Right.
white people can make fun of white people, black people can make fun of black people, Canadians can make fun of Canadians. But we're starting to see like the crossover is a lot more skeptically viewed. Like
Yeah.
it's not really the place of, I mean, definitely like the left-wing narrative is like people in groups of power, or like the less oppressed group should never stereotype the more oppressed group. But if it happens the other way around, it's no big deal because
Right. I was thinking like
there's a power dynamic.
for sure. Like the stereotype that's come around the internet, is the idea of Karen. Like, this idea of a white suburban mom who is, always complains about everything, whether it's the movie theater or the
Right.
restaurant or whatever. And so like that's obviously a funny
Right.
stereotype because it's often true, and it like and it's in the people in power. But you don't want to stereotype a black teenager with a hoodie like because they're part of the minority group. Like I think, and that is fair, or at least that's what the narrative is
Right.
nowadays.
Yeah.
So.
It's pretty wild.
Yeah, and I think like we just have to be careful. Like we have to know, I think when we use stereotypes in humor, we have to be even more aware of letting that not just seep into the way we judge people and the way we talk to people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
Yeah, I definitely think about like, oh, what are the ways that I use stereotypes, and I definitely have to be careful. But yeah, it's just, it is funny. I remember like being in chess club. Like chess has always been a big part of my life, especially being in chess club at college. Like almost all of the people in chess club were math majors. So like that's definitely a stereotype, and we definitely fit that really well. Like,
right.
Oh man.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's tough because like people are just like always going to be interested in certain things, right? Like
they're just they're common. They're crossovers. So like when I think back to your statement where it's like little or no ascertainable truth, it's like, well, I mean, clearly people who are interested in chess are going to have math interests. Like we see that empirically, and it makes logical sense that like someone who would be interested in a game of like counting and
numbers,
like calculating would also be interested in math. That should be very patently obvious. But when we start getting into the really broad stereotypes, like I can definitely see how like, okay, yeah, it's probably a little bit less true to assume Canadians are all polite and stuff like that,
Right.
Like, it starts to become pretty unhelpful and probably not as true as we would like to think they are.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, like people are complicated. I think it's back to talking about Kamala Harris. Like, people are complicated and we can't reduce them to their base traits or their base ideologies or their base interests. All right. Like people are going to like what they like and do what they do, and have to love them as a holistic person.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So
yeah,
that is the truth. So I love talking about this, and I think it's an ongoing thought in the back of my mind ever since that conversation. And I want to constantly be better catching myself when I use stereotypes, or making sure that the stereotypes I use are positive and like actually don't hurt other people, or I'm not letting them make my judgments on other people. So
nice.
Anything else to add?
Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah, it was really, really good to think about this stuff. Yeah, it is crazy how prevalent they are.
Yeah, I mean,
beyond just the like negative perception that we have.
And I think that's the other part that when we talk about stereotypes, we should talk about these other issues. And I want to see more studies done on like, okay, so how do all these other stereotypes affect us, then rather than just race stereotypes and gender stereotypes, right? Because those are easy and obvious. So let's talk about some of the other ones and how we use those. So.
Nice. Cool. Well, should we jump into the recommendation?
Yeah. What kind of recommendation you got for us?
All right. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. So this is a YouTube channel that Catherine and I probably discovered it, in all honesty. We discovered recently. His name's Joshua Wiesman. He is a cooking channel. He has like stupid amount of videos. He has so many videos where he walks you
posting all the time too.
Oh my gosh, all the time. Because I know he quit his job and as a chef, like a professional chef, to do YouTube full time.
Okay.
So like, a year ago, actually don't know. Let me look at the post date on this. He hit 100,000 subscribers February 25th, 2019. So that's a year and a half ago, roughly. That was 100,000 subscribers. Now he's at 2.62 million subscribers.
Wow, that's a steep increase pretty quickly.
Yeah, so he's really blown up as of late. And I think as he's gone full time, he has so many fun recipes. They've all been really delicious, the ones we've tried. He does like really fun, trendy ones where he'll do like the But Better series, where he like takes a common food like Chipotle burrito. Like you can see this one I'm kind of hovering over right here. And he tries to make it at home, but make it better than Chipotle. Or like, this is a crazy one, making Doritos at home.
That's impressive.
Yeah, making Cinnabon at home. He'll do like the Baconator, Whataburger, honey butter chicken biscuit, McDonald's McNuggets. But he's all over the map. He doesn't just do like the fast food stuff. He has his own restaurant recipes that he talks about. Like, here's the taco recipe. But he'll do some where he does like a but cheaper series, where it's like if you're on a budget but you still want to cook some things, what are some good ways to do that? He has like easier ones where he'll do like easy recipes, easy this, easy that. He has a couple
easy crab cake sounds really good.
Yeah.
Love crab cakes.
Yeah, and then he'll do ones where it's like cheaper, healthier. So he really mixes it up. He's a lot of fun. He does a really good job editing. So like the flow is really fast paced. He's really funny. I definitely recommend him if you're looking to like do a little bit more cooking. I know Catherine and I have done a lot more cooking since COVID has started, and we've like,
right.
We basically watch everything. This is like the Critical Conversations YouTube that I'm showing you, but so it doesn't show a red bar in every single one of them. But on my personal YouTube, like we've literally watched probably all of these.
That's awesome. All right, so which ones have you made and which ones are good?
You check them out if you're interested in cooking. Let's see. I don't know if we've done a bunch of his newer ones yet. Let me see. What have we done? We've done this chicken parm, which was absolutely so good.
Okay.
What else? I feel like I should know off the top of my head. We have been cooking like crazy people in this house.
That's great.
So we've blown right by
Express at home, orange chicken at home. Oh man.
A lot of times we just take like little ideas from what he's done. Like in this we like take ideas for when we cook. He has so many that I can't even find them all.
All right. Well, very cool. Yeah, what a good recommendation.
Yeah, really good. I totally meant to ask you this beforehand, Jared, but for the idea for next week, I need to stop sharing my screen. Can I just go ahead and go with the one we had briefly talked about cancel culture?
Yes, let's do it. I was thinking that was going to be the plan, so.
Okay, all right, cool. I wasn't sure if we confirmed it. But yeah, so I'm going to give like a quick introduction to next week's topic.
Go for it.
Which is on cancel culture. So we definitely have been hearing this buzzword cancel culture really been on the rise for a couple of years now. And it kind of like I feel like it hits a fervor where it's like we have like a string of people who are quote canceled.
Like every few months it's like this like big ramp up, and then it's, we don't talk about it for a little bit.
Yeah, like I feel like it's very closely related to the Me Too movement, where that kind of was really big probably like 3 years ago. I remember, maybe 4 years ago. And yeah, there's this weird secondary debate happening where you have like cancel culture, where you have critics on the right that tend to be a lot more skeptical of cancel culture. They have this caricature of someone said something off color on their Twitter 9 years ago, and now the mob's trying to get them canceled and try to get them fired. I think we definitely have seen instances of that where it was like not helpful, and a lot of times it's just like a total mob rule. I remember like, actually I didn't mean to talk about this, but this crazy, like, do you remember Papa John from Papa John's, like the Papa John?
Okay.
John, what's his name?
I couldn't tell you. John?
I don't know.
His first name's not Papa? I'm pretty sure it's Papa. Apparently,
like, everyone calls him Papa, like, which is very funny. But yeah, he was fired and he was removed from like all the Papa John stuff, and he basically, his side is like it was a complete like smear campaign, and they leveraged cancel culture and all this stuff. So whatever, I don't know all the weeds of it, but like stuff like that where it was like, well, yeah, now that he's talking about it in the context, it does seem like they sort of trapped him, and then the mob just took it from there. And these companies have to like, it doesn't matter what the truth is, you just have to get the mob to stop. So it's really interesting. Yeah. But I do think on the flip side, the idea of social pressure helping to regulate human behavior is super important. And there's definitely so much good that came out of the Me Too movement, and
calling out
cancel culture as a whole. Yep. Yeah. Like, hey, you're going to be held accountable for what you say.
Right.
So don't just mouth off now that you're young. This stuff is going to stick around. And even if, you're saying stuff now, like you people are listening. And I find this really important, and it's important, I think, for the right wing and those who are more like a liberal free society to realize like this is a non-government way for people to sort of be held accountable for what they say, and we don't need the government to enforce like speech rules or like free speech, because we have the system of social pressures. And we'll get more into this because there's been a lot of like, I remember in college reading a lot of more like liberal, classical liberal, like in the more free market like sense, that have had a lot of good writings on the goods of social pressure and why a lot of times what is common with people and what the social cues and social norms are much more important than what the actual laws are, basically.
Right.
So just because you pass a law, if it doesn't conflict with what the social norms are and what people are used to doing, that law is not going to go well. So I think it's interesting to have the right sort of criticize cancel culture, but also it's sort of a lifeline in the sense that it can explain why we don't need the government to be regulating speech, because we can effectively do it as people. Where, if you mouth off and say terrible racist things, people are not going to buy your sandwiches. Like, that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
So
there's a couple other aspects I want to talk about too. Like, I think recently the right has co-opted the use of cancel culture and the phrasing of cancel culture as this very nebulous, like the government is coming to cancel your culture,
right?
Which
is a huge difference, right?
Which my company does all the time. We've used that cancel culture narrative in our messaging because we're like, hey, like, the government's coming to cancel your churches, like all this kinds of stuff. So it's become this broader issue than just what originally started as.
Absolutely.
So
I think there's a lot of deep stuff behind it. It's more to it than just cancel culture is good or cancel culture is bad. Like, this is a huge philosophical free speech, free society issue.
I think it's gonna not go away anytime soon. So
so looking forward to diving more into that, the historical thoughts behind it and the ramifications of it and the evolution of it. So hopefully we'll be able to jump into all that. So join us next week for that. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any thoughts on stereotypes or anything we missed, or if you disagree with us, please let us know. Comment wherever, send us a text, whatever you want to do. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Because that's the idea, is to have more conversations, right? We want to continue these conversations long after just the two of us.
Yep.
We're on Facebook, we're on Spotify, Pocket Casts, YouTube. Check us out in all those places, whatever floats your boat. So,
alrighty. Thanks so much, guys.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Adios.